My last day in Inverness involved me freezing my butt off. Aloha and welcome back to WANDEROUS. My name is Andrew Crusoe, your host, and this is part 3 of a little series within WANDEROUS all about Scotland. I decided to walk up to the Inverness Firth, which I think it just means it's a delta. The Loch Ness actually becomes the River Ness and flows through Inverness and then goes into the ocean. And I had this idea in my mind. I'm like, I want to go up. I want to go to the edge. I want to go to the coast. And I'm glad that I did, but it wasn't the best walk, to be honest. I'll add a couple photos of this to the supporters. If it's your first time listening, I would recommend that you go back to the first Scotland episode, 2 episodes before this. It's going to give you more context about what's going on. So I made it up to where the River Ness empties into the ocean. They built this long suspension bridge to get people over the river. Unfortunately, it was low tide, and it was not the most attractive time to do it. It was cool, though. I said, there were birds. There were little people explaining which birds will come. Which birds will come? We have great black-backed gull. Say that 10 times fast. We got oyster catchers, cormorants, of course. Gulls, plovers, yada yada, ringed plover, red shank. Red shank sounds like a weapon. And I just had it was a pretty nice midday sort of saunter around. I was not waking up early in this time. As I mentioned before, the sun wasn't even getting dark until 11 p.m. We were 59 degrees north latitude. Not quite the Arctic Circle, but pretty far up there. It had definitely been the most northern place I'd ever been in my life. And it did have a very special, almost mythic kind of quality to it. The land just felt different, After that little saunter, I was getting stoked because I was getting ready to take the bus to my last place, Edinburgh, which was, I believe, about another 3 or 4 hours. Yeah. And so I went back to my host and I said goodbye to him, got my crap and tidied up my bed, and he was so warm and so nice, and I was just reflecting on he even did a Joe Biden impression for me. I don't know why. The bus to Edinburgh. So Edinburgh is a very important place. It's much larger than even Glasgow, and the nice thing about Edinburgh is just the variety and the hike that I was about to do. So I'm just, once again, I'm on the bus, I'm looking out on the rolling green hills. And one thing I wasn't prepared for in Edinburgh, I didn't do tons of research, to be honest. I wasn't, when you're going to a country, that they speak English, and I already had a Couchsurfing host set up. I wasn't too concerned. I'd already had, I'd been having a good time anyway, so I was just going with the flow, which is something that I like to talk about. I made it to the Prince's Street, sort of like downtown-ish, and immediately got confused by the bus system. Luckily, Google helped. There's all these color-coded things, right? And it was just a bit, I think it's because there were multiple bus stops, and I'm like, am I at the right one? So you might want to do a bit of research on that beforehand. I was staying sort of in I think it was like the southwestern, sort of like the west side. Yeah, west-ish, still within the city. And I was very lucky, right when I got there, my host shared, I believe my host was even vegan like me, which is very cool. And she shared like pasta with textured, I hate the term textured soy protein because it sounds bad, but this was like really good. Like, I don't know. It seemed, I don't know. It was a good one, and it really rounded out the pasta, greens and everything. She was to not sugarcoat things, to be more direct. She was a pretty eccentric Polish woman, and I quickly learned in the course of this mini adventure. I was there for it was again once again 2 or 3 nights. Sometimes when you stay with somebody, you get the sense that their life is actually a sitcom. And I got that, I mean, like vaguely like a sitcom. And I got that sense when I was there. I learned about her vaguely homeless brother who may or may not appear. One of the things that actually is the biggest thing that stood out to me, besides just the overall vibe of the place, was that her building, she was at like the third floor, had the most industrial lock I've ever seen in my life. It was like she gave me the key. It was like a special, really long key, and it was double bolt, and you had to jiggle it a little bit. So sometimes when you're couch surfing, there's a learning curve even with the lock. So be prepared for that. I really recommend that you lock it and unlock it with them present. So if there is a little trick, they can go, oh, that's right, you need to jiggle this at this part. It might sound really obvious, but it's something that's really important. You don't want to get locked out of your host, especially if they're working during the day and you go in and out. It's a good best practice, I would say. So I don't even have any photos from the next morning. I stayed in a very small, I stayed in a kind of a work room that had a couch. The couch was actually very comfortable, and I slept for a while. I was just really, I've been doing a lot. I've been doing a lot of hitchhiking, as I said, in Inverness, and hiking around. The whole bit with Loch Ness had only been the day before. So I had been doing a lot every single day. So I took that opportunity, and this is important to do, to really listen to your body with these things. Otherwise, your body will veto your plans sometimes. If you push your body's boundaries too much, it will override you. It can override you in many ways. You might just have pain. You might have a lot of soreness. You might have a pinched nerve. But your body will tell you if you really need to take a break. Or it might be worse. It might be, a nasty virus. Maybe you push yourself too hard and let your immune system go a little under, which makes you susceptible. But I see these all as signals. They're all codes in a way. We can interpret these signals how we wish. And I choose to interpret them as signals to slow down. And that can be very useful. So the next day, I wanted to give back, as I usually do, and I decided to make for her, and maybe I'll share the recipe in this. Well, yeah, I'll share the basics. I make a cashew-based cheese sauce that it doesn't require any dairy at all. So I've made this sauce in many different contexts in different countries, and it's pretty funny because ideally you get a really good blender, and sometimes people don't have a really good blender because that's life. I recall that I used it was a metal blender she had that I couldn't even see how blended the thing was. It was a stainless steel large cup thing, and that was an adventure. So you simmer the cashews, some onion and garlic if you'd like, but the main bits are the cashew. And you really want to have, and you also simmer carrots. The main thing is the cashew, the carrot, and the onion. And you put some salt in there, and then you drain off like maybe half of the water, and you blend that. And you get a feel for how much water you want to have in this. You blend that, and then you add a pinch of cayenne and lemon juice. The lemon juice will keep the sauce yellow and cheesy. Now, the most important ingredient is unfortunately the most difficult to find, and it's not love, although that's important. Well, you could debate. So I've made it without this ingredient, and it's good, but it's really the icing on the cake, to use a inappropriate metaphor, and that is nutritional yeast. Now, a lot of people don't really know what nutritional yeast is. It's not like the yeast you use to make bread. It's not rising yeast. It's sort of it's kind of a hippie food. It's kind of it's a dietary supplement. It's a different version of yeast, and they culture it. It comes usually unprocessed. It comes in these really big flakes, not as strong as it's not like a chip are crisp. It's like a brittle yellow flake. Oftentimes you'll find it in powder as well, nutritional yeast. I had been traveling with nutritional yeast because I knew that I wanted to make this for my hosts, and it's tricky to find. Yeah, I think I ended up finding it in one place in France later, but when you're traveling, you can't like refrigerate what you're traveling with. It stays pretty good. It stays okay for a couple months, but I ended up having to throw the bit out that I had when I reached. I think it was when I got to India at that point, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I apologize. So I made, I simmered the broccoli and I made elbow noodles, and she was very touched that I made all this food, and it's a very good feeling to do that. I didn't even do anything all day, actually, on that day besides cook. I went to the store, picked up a couple things, and I just needed to sometimes if you need permission to sit and read a book and make a sauce, and that's all you really do that day, I am giving you permission to do that. Not that you need my permission, but if you want somebody to tell you it's okay, believe me, I do it all the time. I think that's partly why I look younger than I am. I believe in sleep and I believe in rest. It just makes for a happier life, especially when you are walking a fair amount on the other days of the week. And maybe if people want, I can do a little episode just about sort of exercise balance. I can also include, I don't know, it's weird to include if people want, I can, you can comment, especially supporters can comment. I'll include a photo of the vegan mac and cheese if you want. Because this episode comes out a few days before the bonus for the supporters. The next day, though, was really taken up with Holyrood Park. I hope I'm saying that right. It's Holyrod. It's toward the middle of Edinburgh. Holyrood Park is really worth your time. The most famous thing in the park is Arthur's Seat, which is near this marker that shows the latitude. Latitude 55 degrees, 56 minutes, 43 seconds north. Longitude 3 degrees, 9 minutes, 38 seconds west. Pretty much right around where London would be. And to get to Arthur's Seat, you have to walk up this extinct volcano. It doesn't really look like a volcano. It looks like a big old hill. And I just had such a fun time going up this very lumpy. It's really multiple hills. Now looking at the photos, it does remind me of a greener version of Mauna Kea in some ways, although not nearly as tall. Arthur's Seat is 250 meters. It's nothing. It's tiny. But I got some really verdant shots of this that I'll include in the bonuses. I'll heart this one. And I had a nice time, chatting with people going up, and it was a pretty good day. It was a pretty good day, and all of these trails just going up and down the various hills. But of course, Arthur's Seat was on the very top, and there's some legend about King Arthur going up there. But they have a plaque that's been worn away and is basically unreadable. But you've probably seen there's a pretty well-known photo of me wearing a blue long sleeve shirt with my blue astral shoes. On Arthur's Seat, just with my hair just blown back, because wow, was it windy. That's actually the other major memory that I have of that place was gale force winds. It was a good thing that it was early July. Otherwise, you would freeze your ass off going up there. And there are some really lovely panoramas that I've taken. I'll include my favorite in the bonuses as well. But this isn't all just about bonuses. This is about the story. I met some very kind people who really wanted to follow me on Instagram on the way down. Coming down from Arthur's Seat's pretty cool too, because you see the whole bay. You get a feeling for the size of Edinburgh in general. There's a lot of construction, at least when I was there. We made it down to one of these little ponds where people would feed the geese. There were many very, very cute white geese hanging out, and swans. I did potentially make a little mistake here. So it was getting late. I didn't get as early a start as I wanted. So it was about coming on to 4 p.m. And apparently I went into like one of the sillier museums. I don't know. I thought it was great. I'll include a couple things here, but my host, they had crystal, they had, tea and coffee service marshal, basically like the oldest china, this beautiful silver, solid, almost solid silver china set. Really, I thought it was very nice. But my host later on said that I went to the most boring museum. So, I had a very direct, honest host. I also I'm going to include this. There was and you can just look this up too. It's called the Bona Lisa, Bona Lisa, which is a sculpture that was out on the street. That was a giraffe, but it was just showing the bones of the giraffe. But it had a Dia de los Muertos, kind of like Day of the Dead sort of a vibe with the flowers and the bones. And it was quite fun and lovely. And I'm going under these ancient little, these little walkways. And there's an old toll booth wind that was very cool. And there are so many, it's going to sound like I'm talking about London again, but there's so much ancient architecture up here, obviously. Very striking and haunting cathedrals, especially the ones that have red blinds. I think I will include something that became, it's actually a market now, but it was a cathedral. It is this blood red door, and it is one of the creepiest buildings I've ever seen along the Royal Mile. The Royal Mile, of course, is the road that's leading up to Edinburgh Castle. And unfortunately, the castle had closed. By the time I got there, they closed very early. I was pretty bummed out about this. There was something that was very cool called the Witch's Well, which I did a video on, which I'll link to, most likely, in the show notes. So once again, the show notes are at my Patreon, patreon.com/Hello Crusoe. It's Hello and Crusoe, just like Robinson Crusoe. And it's an interesting little legend. It started as a spring, and then they made it like a basically drinking fountain. And it was, I'll leave it for the video. There's sort of an interesting story with that. That's one of the more cute little things that I found. But if you do go, it's better to go to Edinburgh Castle as early as possible in the morning. I messed up. This was my last full day in Edinburgh. But I did have a chance to, the castle is not totally a lost cause, as you will see soon. So I made it back around. I made it back down off the hill because much of the Royal Mile is going up this hill. I had a lovely time enjoying the Scott Monument, dedicated to Sir Walter Scott, which is an immense, gorgeous, Gothic, haunting creation. But I made it back down to the street level. Alongside, there's these gardens, below the hill that Edinburgh Castle is on. It's very pretty. And I got to see, I got to have a very nice look at the castle, actually. And it wasn't a complete loss. Honestly, like a better perspective than you would get if you were on the inside. Because I've been in castles, it's really not a big deal. It really felt like Lord of the Rings. Again, it was very much like a vaguely elvish kind of feeling to some of these things. Although this was a bit more like it had a bit more of like a Rohirrim, like the horse tribes. It had a bit of that kind of feeling to it. So in closing, and I know I haven't had incredibly profound things to say about Edinburgh, but I do really, really recommend that you walk down the Royal Mile. I took a time lapse where you just get a sense of just the hustle and bustle and the way the light changes, the way the timepieces move. There's a large clock on one of these buildings in the Royal Mile. It's a very striking and evocative place. I also passed by apparently the old home of David Hume, and they had a very funny quote that they had printed alongside, and it said, "I have written on all sorts of subjects, yet I have no enemies, except all the Whigs, all the Tories, and all the Christians." They don't take themselves too seriously in Edinburgh, I would say, and I've never seen so much Gothic architecture in my life. I wish I'd had time to explore further. I wish I had time to go into some of the cathedrals. It was really after everything that I had done in the Highlands and in Glasgow, my body just took a rest day. And the next morning, I cleaned up the little guest room I was staying in, packed up all my stuff, and made my way back to Acton, which was it must have been about 9 hours, I guess. And this is all leading into something that I think I will save for a members only episode, because it blends into, well, I suppose I can say a little bit. So I ended up going back to the Natural History Museum to go on a little date with someone who I'd met. And we went to see Dippy, which is a life-sized, it's a huge skeleton of a Diplodocus, which is sort of like a brontosaurus. And this exhibit in the Natural History Museum, you had to register beforehand. I think it was still free. I could be wrong, or very, very cheap. This animal filled the room. It was, I don't even know. It was like 20 meters long. It was like 60 feet long. And it was hypnotizing. One of the creepiest things was actually the shadow that it cast on the wall. And you could just imagine what it would have been like if it had the bones and the sinews and the skin and everything. If it was alive, you can imagine just how much sound this thing must have generated moving around, how formidable it must have felt. I'm going to include a panorama of this in the show notes as well, because it's just an incredible animal. And I'm going around with my date, and we're talking about dinosaurs, and it was a lovely, lovely afternoon. I was very lucky to stay at the place, at my Spanish friend's place again. I had left a couple things, as you might remember I mentioned in a previous episode. I left a bunch of things there, and everything was right where I left it. Everything was great, and it was very fun to wander through the Natural History Museum. I was quite impressed because she could read Arabic. I'm very lucky to seem to attract very intelligent people into my life. We also passed one of the silliest videos that I made as well. We passed the Thin House, which is in London, and it's a pretty famous, very narrow brick building. And it's sort of, I don't know if you've ever seen, there's a building in New York sort of like this, but this was actually in better condition. I don't really have a point of that. I just wanted to mention the Thin House because it was pretty entertaining. If you're around in the area, you can just look up. It's in Chelsea. It's by Westminster. The Thin House is a pretty funky building. I don't even know how I mean, it doesn't look very comfortable. You know, the whole thing is like, 5 feet deep, a little more, maybe like 8, but still. And we continued that date we went over into Hyde Park, which I'd first heard about in a Douglas Adams book because I'm that kind of nerd. And she proceeded to give me a tarot reading, which was very, very sweet. And yeah, it was a very sweet day. So I'll leave the details of my return to Oxford, which is where we're going next in the continuing saga of Andrew in Great Britain. Although we're going to France soon, don't worry. But I returned to Oxford for a very cute visit, a kind of a spicy visit that I will not share publicly because, but I'll be sure to release that next week for the supporters. If you support the show, you will get access to not only over 20 hours of finished audiobook material, the same material that's on Audible, but you'll also get all the photos at the highest level. Well, not the highest level, but like the upper level. You'll get crazy. You get so much. You won't even. It's immersive, and you'll get the spicy episodes. I call those Wanderous After Dark. You can of course cancel at any time. And like I said, I've had people on the Patreon, and majority of what I put on the Patreon is free now because I'm working on getting more attention to it. But I've had people who support me on the Patreon who have supported me for over 7 years, and you know who you are. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Anybody who's done anything to promote the show or to leave a review, really, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I love doing this work. I love sharing, just how the world's inspired me. It's obviously not rigorous scholarly research. That's not what you're coming here for. If you want to know the basic facts of a location, you know where to find that. But if you want to have a feeling of like, hey, here's this eccentric writer, maybe I can do that too. If he can do it, I can do it. And you can. It just takes will. It takes will and a little bit of research. And often you'll find that it costs less to keep moving than it does to stay in the same place. And that's something I didn't really believe viscerally until I experienced it. So, for supporters, tune in next time for something spicy. Otherwise, come back. You'll come back, I'm sure. And we will talk further and maybe even revisit the bear for a second before joining in the Christchurch Evensong, which was a pretty profound experience. And the eventual farewell to the UK soon after that. France is coming. And once again, thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time. There's also a very silly photo of me in front of a fountain.